when you sit down, but it doesn't. Yeah. Okay. When you finish, maybe you can get a double A. I think there's one in the washroom. Yeah. Okay. So how have you been?
Oh, okay. I'm
Busy,
ready to go on vacation, so
Where are you going?
Lewis, Delaware.
Delaware is
Uh,
good.
yeah, right across the Cape May Lewis ferry.
Oh,
I don't take the ferry, but you can see the ferry from there. Yeah, my cousin had a place there, and we started 25 years ago with the family going down there, and we're still going.
oh,
So,
that's nice. Hello.
Hello,
Hi.
how are you, Judy?
All right. Okay. How are you?
Yep, I'm doing okay. Actually, pretty good. The weather, I really love the weather. So,
wow, isn't it wonderful?
yeah.
I had lunch and dinner outside tonight.
Yep,
Oh,
I
what a
did.
treat.
It really is a treat.
Nice, nice, nice. Yes, yes, yes.
And how are you,
Yeah,
Judy?
good. I'm gonna call. I keep meaning to call Chris because I wanted to make some time with you.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll do that.
All right.
Are you going away? Are you taking any
I
time?
am, yeah, we just made plans, actually today. I am going to take a second full week of vacation. Actually, it's going to turn in, it's going to almost be two weeks. The last,
When?
in August.
Last 2 weeks of August?
Yeah, like the 20th to 21st is what I call the third week. So I'm going to be
Yeah.
gone, I'm going to be gone the beginning of that and then beyond that.
And where are you going?
We're going to go, first we're going to go down and spend 3 days in Washington DC with Paige
Great.
before she goes back to, before she goes back to work. And we love that city, so we're going to go do that. And then we're going back to Canada again. We're going to go fishing again.
Oh, nice. Where in Canada did you go?
There is in Ontario, there is a region called the Frontenac Lake area.
Yeah, Frontenac, right. Yeah.
So we're going to go there. We're trying another new cabin. I think this one will be, again, we're looking for the best fishing. And the rumors are that
What do you catch? What do you catch? What kind of fish do you?
mostly we like to catch large and smallmouth bass. It's bass fishing, by and large. Although when we were gone the last week that we were in Canada, it turned into bluegill fishing. There were monstrous bluegills in the lake, and so we caught a lot of those. It's catch and release. Everything we catch, we release.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
so
My
I'm
brother.
looking
yeah,
forward to that.
Yeah. My brother-in-law used to do a lot of fishing. Had a little boat, Boston Harbor. Used to go fishing up in Maine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to take his. So that'll be very nice. So it's the last 2 weeks in August then.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. I'm gonna just get my Bible. We were looking at some of the news before.
Yeah.
The 7 o'clock news with the indictment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was sort of glued to the TV too as I was watching that. I mean,
I was saying to my husband, I finished reading this book, Waco Uprising, and it talked about, the cult in the 1960s, 70s in Waco, Texas. And we were talking about what makes a person join a cult. And in a sense, if you look at some of the things that are going on now with Trump, the supporters, doesn't matter what the news is, doesn't matter the number, nothing. And there were 3 elements. It was really interesting that made me understand a little bit more why and how supporters will follow him. And the first was that it's a sense of community.
right.
And when you think about January 6th, when everybody's standing near everybody else with flags and with guns and with, and it's a community.
Yep.
And you're like everyone else.
Right.
And the second was whatever the menu is of what the leader is offering, if it's immigration, if it's abortion, if it's book banning, if it's voting rights, and you are passionate about, let's just say abortion, anti-abortion, oh, my guy really thinks the same way I do. So I got this community and I got the guy who thinks the same way I do. Okay. And then the third element was a lot of charm, a lot of charisma, and rallies and parades and all this kind of stuff, and somehow it because you kind of wonder, how can people follow, and how can they excuse and rationalize and all of this, and then suddenly there's some kind of reasoned explanation, that you want a sense of community, you want someone who agrees with you, and you got a guy up there who's colorful and vibrant and waving his arms around. So, okay, you're gonna go with him. Because it's very hard to understand how so many people will follow him, even though the facts are right in front of you, and yet they are very willing to walk away from them. And when you see what happened in Jonestown, you see what happened in Waco, Texas, all of these different cults, it's exactly the same. You got one
sense of belonging.
Well, that's it. The sense of community. Yeah.
I think the one thing I would add to that, especially when you link all those experiences together, is that my sense, my sense of having talked to people who are really engaged in the movement, there is the community part is they have a common enemy. They have a common enemy. I mean, in Waco, they were instructed to understand that the government and its enforcement was an enemy of all of them.
Of the Bible, what God said, that's right.
And I think that it may not use the language of enemy, but I think that we are in a time where, in the United States, there's a broad number of people, before any fact of any story comes up, believe that the system of government, regardless of what it is, that government, both Democratic and Republican, that the system itself is an enemy of freedom and an enemy of people. They are convinced. And that's why this person that is emerging as this leader is really outside the bounds. He's outside the bounds both of traditional Republicans, and he's outside the bounds of certainly the self-sense of Democrats and even independents. And his rallying cry is, I will defend you from the government.
Yeah, that's true. Woke, whatever woke.
Well, it's I will defend you from the government. And then so when he can characterize that the government is, he made a really interesting statement the other night that, you think they're coming after me. They're not coming after me. They're coming after you. And I'm standing between them and you. I am your man. I am the man who is going to stand up against this thing of government. And, I understand, this is a gross overstatement, but, it's not as bad as it used to be. But if you take the DMV, Division of Motor Vehicles, as an example of what government does to human life, you can see why people get stirred up to the idea that government itself is the problem. And, go to the post office, go talk about the post office and that whole, people's sense of perception of the debauchery there. And then, talk about taxes, talk about, all these things that are, part of the government. And then some people can expand beyond that, and they can say, even the police are part of the problem, and even the military, and certainly our diplomatic representatives around the world are easily accused of being, failures, big problems, and they're our enemy. They're the ones that take us into wars. And I don't know. It just seems to me that
Yeah.
I also wanted to say, and I think you'll see how this relates to the psalm we're going to read tonight. I've always been very cautious about the word cult. I'm cautious about it. It's easy to throw it out there. But, there's plenty of people in our society that believe that religion itself is a cult. And that religion doesn't pay any attention to facts, or they don't worry about facts. They don't worry about facts. Instead, they are following and organizing their lives around things that are, in essence, they're really fairy tales. The whole idea of the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. There's just lots of people who look at the numbers of people who go to church. And I'll say this, maybe it'll get me in some trouble in terms of, am I really an ecumenical person? But when I look at the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church, and I looked at the practice of the doctrines today, it's not specific to the Roman Catholic Church, but it's even in the Presbyterian Church. I want to say to people, listen to what you're being asked to say. Listen to what you're agreeing to in things like the Apostles' Creed. And when you read some of the doctrinal statements of the church, and I want to say, do you really believe that? Do you really believe that? And how did you come to believe that? Because a lot of what is described there, to me, I still see myself thoroughly a Christian and thoroughly a part of the structures of the church, but boy, I do so with a lot of caution. A lot of caution. Because the church, you could talk about some nondescript group of people that, are in the political milieu, but religion has been responsible for whipping people up to craziness more than anything else in the history of the world. And the behavior of the people, sometimes hanging people, sometimes, again, there's a lot in my life today, a lot of information and graphic depictions of how Christians treated slaves, and especially runaway slaves. And how did they get Christians to treat people like that? And then nowadays, I have the same feeling about, I just takes my breath away when I realize that, honestly, there are border issues. There are big problems with the border of the United States. But in order to deal with it, Texas put this floating wall in the middle of the river for people who are desperately trying to get across the river, and the result of it was people drown, and they are drowning. It's designed to make them drown when they get halfway across the river, and there's no place for them to go. And then I go, okay, you sure you want to use the language of cult? Are you sure we can handle that? Do we know really what that means, and are we familiar with how easily, I believe, and maybe it's me too, how easily we are caught up in whirlwind ideas and emotions that somehow override our rational, critical minds.
Well, that's the key word. I looked it up with in Wikipedia, and it says the official definition: a relatively small group that excessively controls its members, whom share a set of acts and practices which require unwavering devotion and are considered deviant outside the norms of society, and typically led by a charismatic and often self-appointed leader. This is a lot of what you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, I became familiar a lot with the idea of cult when I was in college, because the Hare Krishnas at the time were in the airports recruiting people, and
That's right.
my roommate, I had 4 roommates in college, and one of them's name was Dave, and the report came back that Dave's older sister had been recruited and brainwashed into one of the Hare Krishna cults. And it's interesting how the language about it, who are these people, what do they do, the language and the description and the definition of them is, it's all about they're really bad people. You know, they're really bad people. Now, I don't know if they do this anymore, but you know, back in the crazy 70s, if you were a parent of a child who you believe was taken and being held captive by a cult like this, there were deprogrammers.
Oh, yes.
And you remember this?
Yes,
And,
yes, yes.
and
yes.
so my roommate Dave and a couple of other guys, I did not go. I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this. But they found out her location, and they went and they kidnapped her back.
Yep.
And then they took her to a deprogramming center, you know, where they worked with her and all. And I have to say, looking back on it now, there's parts of the story that, I don't know, it doesn't sound so demonic, because this is a young woman whose boyfriend had broken up with her. She was full of despair. She was just absolutely full of loneliness and despair in the world. Her life was going nowhere, and she, in order to sort of make herself feel better, she went to an art gallery in D.C. And in the art gallery, 2 members of the, quote, cult approached her, and they talked to her about her life. And she shared with them the heartache and the brokenness of her lonely life. And they said to her, why don't you come with us and join a community where we love each other? We just love each other. And honestly, they referred to the orientation as love bombing. that the people who joined that group, this was true of the Koresh people when they interviewed them.
Oh, yeah.
The Koresh people said to you, we're not being held against our will here. You know, the experience that we've had in this community is love and acceptance like we have never had anywhere else on this earth. And then that engendered the loyalty and the willingness to do whatever it took.
Give up control.
And so, you know, it's just, well, they say that the victory is always described by the winner, right? But it's not always.
I had a very good friend whose son became a member of a cult, and they did just what you're talking about. They were very distraught, and yet in the very beginning, when he would come home, he would tell them the same thing. You have no idea, Mom and Dad. You know, they love each other. They're good to each other. They're kind. Why are you telling me that I shouldn't, you know, stay in the, and they never use the word cult. I mean, the parents did. And it went on for about a year. And then, and my friend was very torn. She said, you know, Steve was his name. He really seems to be so happy, but her husband was dead set against it. And so finally what they did was they did just what you're saying. Bert had some other friends. They kidnapped Steve, and they took him to a deprogrammer who I guess at the time was very well known. And they deprogrammed him. And he was married at the time. He met someone, you know, in the cult. She stayed in the cult. After he got out and he was deprogrammed, they divorced. And they lived their separate lives, and then he went on to talk about his experiences and to warn people, you know, not to get involved. but it was very much the same. That was, these deprogrammers were well known, I guess, and they took them to, right, they took them to separate, hiding places, whatever, and do the deprogramming, right. Now, you don't hear about that anymore.
I don't know that, I don't know if it still goes on, but I think one of the reasons that it might not is because we have rethought this. There's an arrogance to the language that says that's a cult, you're doing this against your will, and also, look, this is where it gets weird for me, because the Christian community, when it is at its best, provides love to people and acceptance to people and offers family. There's a huge language of family in the church. We are a family. And part of that comes out of the reality is that an awful lot of quote-unquote families are very broken. They don't provide a lot of love and care and compassion for people. And so the church steps in as, the surrogate family. And sometimes that also then leads to an enormous amount of loyalty and devotion to the people who are the leaders of that congregation.
And they're willing to have control of their lives to this person.
The Presbyterian Church, in recent history, has been very suspicious of pastors who are very charismatic. Very suspicious of them. In fact, I ran into some trouble early on in my process of becoming a Presbyterian pastor because I was criticized as being, I was too charismatic. It was like the cult of personality that could grow up around me, and there were people who, I served 5 churches. Every one of those 5 churches grew. One church, the attendance to regulars, tripled when I went there. And then when you talk to some of the other Presbyterian pastors, I knew what they were saying behind my back. I knew what they were saying. They were saying, he's one of those charismatic guys. And then they would find out that I had some background in the Baptist church. And Presbyterians' criticism of the Baptist church is that Baptist preachers are all cult leaders. They're all just charismatic. Barbara's reference last week, and then finding from Tony Campolo. I mean, when you listen to Presbyterian scholars from the seminaries talk about Tony Campolo, they'll tell you he's a cult leader. He tells a lot of funny stories, and people laugh, and they're so excited about him, but they're suspicious that people are following him because of his charisma.
So is it a head versus heart kind of thing? That people think that it should be an intellectual faith rather than a inspirational faith, I guess is what I think of Tony Campolo and a lot of people, and you, as an inspiration to me. And that's what I need is, intellectually, I think it's important to have the reasoning, but to me, faith is an emotional thing.
Yeah, and I think, what I have sort of unfairly, maybe superficially characterized is that the Reformed Church, by its very tradition, was very suspicious of emotion. Mm-hmm. If it was emotional, you should not trust it. Because if you are being, and that was part of what people would stand in the back and, if I told a story and the traditional Presbyterian was tempted to cry, they recognized that right away. There's something wrong here because I should not be emotionally engaged in this. That should not be happening to me. And then,
So-
so then they preferred, when they came to church, they preferred a rational, reasonable argument, if you will, almost a lecture about faith in God and in Jesus Christ and all the rest of that. But emotion is really untrustworthy. You cannot rely on your emotions. And if you find that you're following someone because it feels good, then you, of all people, should be aware you may be caught up in a cult. I don't care if it's in the Presbyterian church or where it is, but if your emotions are what's, drawing you, then you need to get out. You need to get away, because you will be led into uncritical thinking and into doing things that, you wouldn't do if you were in your right mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I say that, people accuse me. They didn't really accuse me, but the traditional hardline, old school Presbyterians were very critical or very suspicious of my style. And yet, I would say to them, okay, but here's the difference. I'm not a street preacher. I didn't just walk up and stand up in the pulpit and start emoting. I have all the training. I've gone to graduate school. I was a philosophy and a rationalist in my training. But in my view, if the purpose of preaching is to motivate people, and I believe that's what it is, then you have to be able to venture comfortably into the area of emotions. You have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, how do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? Nowadays, I'm now the old man that's critical of everybody else. But, I look at what's happening in terms of congregations that are gathered together around. Now, it's not so much they're gathered together around emotional or compelling preachers, but they're gathered together around rock bands. And the music, rock and roll music, my parents hated it because it's all emotion. It's rhythm and it's emotion. And hello, Melinda. And so if my grandparents in their Presbyterian church were afraid of emotions, then I would be part of the group that looks at what's happening in a lot of contemporary church and say, I'm suspicious of rhythm. You got to watch, because you can get, the whirling dervish kind of thing. You can end up, I criticize my kids all the time, and I say, have you listened to the lyrics that you're dancing to? Have you paid attention to what they're saying? And the kids will tell you it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There's awesome rhythms and all, so what is a cult?
Yeah.
And how does a cult help you to manage? I hope we'll be able to make the connection to the psalm tonight, but my father grew up in a Presbyterian church, in a country Presbyterian church, rigid doctrinal Presbyterian church. The service was always the same. The liturgy was the same. And the preachers were extremely boring, but it did not matter. They came, they preached their sermon. The church got over always at noon, right on time. And they were extremely suspicious of anything emotional that might happen in church. And my father grew up in that church. And then in the summertime, when he was, 21, he went, in order to go on a date with my mother, he went to a summer tent revival meeting. And the Methodists were good at this. They were all about emotion. And he went to this place where all of a sudden emotion was married to theology, and he was smitten. He was overwhelmed. He had a huge emotional experience, and then began to believe that the church had made a major mistake by leaving out this dimension of human life and denying it in the experience of worship. And so in the African American church, they talk about the learning and the burning. You got to have both. You got to have the burning emotion, the emotive part, which you should be comfortable with, but you can never let that be separated from the learning. And that's two parts of the Christian life. I think
it's not an either or, it's a both.
it's a both and together. It's an integration of the two. And so if you're in a church or you're in a community that is all wrapped up in emotion only, and you're being asked to set aside your reasonableness or your rational thinking, or questioning is not really welcome as a part of what you're doing, you may be in a cult. I don't care how mainstream it is. Or on the other hand, if you're part of a group and the glue that keeps you together in the community is only just the rationality and the reasonableness, and there's no warmth, and there's no love shared between people in that community, then I don't think yet you've engaged in the call of God in life, because it's together. These are integral parts of who we are and how we're supposed to move through life. I mean, we started out talking a little bit about the political movement. I think we make a mistake when we try to walk up to people who are part of what's going on in the tumult and turbulation of political movement and ask rational questions. Because it's all emotion. It's all emotion. Yeah.
You hit on something so true, because we know someone who very much is a Trump supporter, and when you try to be objective and you try to talk about facts and all those Spartan words, he just doesn't go with you at all, and then you wonder, well, but don't you see? I'm not making up something. I mean, it's in front of your eyes. You hear the noise. You hear the rumble. It doesn't seem to matter. And so, therefore, you're right. It's terribly frustrating to stand on that side of the boundary and use rationale, and use evidence and use fact. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So you kind of then walk away, and you walk away disappointed, but where do you go then? If you can't, if what you see in front of you is not what you want to see, then reason has no more place. It's just as you say.
Right. So I'll take a risk and say maybe a metaphor or an analogy is, if you can imagine, you're driving down the road, and the car in front of you all of a sudden collides with a tree and rolls over. And you're the first one on the scene. And you move up in the scene and you find out that the driver is dead, but that the passenger sitting next to the driver is like freaking out, like just going berserk. And so what's happening then in that moment is a demonstration of emotions unleashed. And think about, would you take that person out of the car and sit them down on the side of the road and try to explain to them, now listen, I understand that your partner is dead, but let's think about this. In a couple of weeks, you'll get over this. You'll be fine. You're not injured. So what are you all upset about? You hear what I'm saying? It's like, you just,
Good analogy.
yeah, and if you try to reason with that person, they will become combative to you.
Exactly.
They will,
Yeah.
they will get in your face and say, what is wrong with you? Because the overwhelming cloud that is, to me, is in American politics is emotion. It's emotion. And emotion does not respond, ultimately, to the reasonableness of it. So a good EMT person who comes along to this scene takes the surviving passenger, and what do? They just put their arm around them and say, here, cry on my shoulder. Because it doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter. They'll start to say, my life is over, and everything in my world has come to an end, and this is the worst thing that could ever happen. But you don't respond by going, well, now this is not the worst thing that could ever happen to you.
Right.
You don't.
So it's an excellent analogy. I'm thinking about my conversation with this particular person, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, they don't hear it, they don't listen, and then they do become confrontive and combative. Yeah. So
I think they taught us in pastoral care what I thought was one of the most profound lessons. And they said that sometimes in pastoral care, you need to have ready this sentence. You say to the person, I can see why that would be so important to you. It's non-argumentative. It focuses on that person, and it authenticates, it legitimates their feeling. If their rage is towards the government because they got taxed last year and didn't have, if their rage is towards the government because somebody they know was unjustly accused, you come and stand by them with a sentence like, I can see why the position that you have would be so important to you. And, I haven't really tried it yet with the members of my family, my extended family. I haven't, the most radical members of them, I haven't tried it. But I have this sense that if I could have the composure to say it and to really mean it.
yeah, when I was working at Nabisco, there was a script that we had. Some of us had who were doing some of these workshops, and it started with I understand you feel this way, and therefore, and then you go on, but you start with the I, just like what you're saying, and then you do the you, and then and then they're listening at least, yeah, and then you can develop and create your own last sentence, but just as you say, yeah, exactly, yeah. That you let them know that you understand whatever.
Yeah, and it's non-argumentative. It's non-argumentative. When the internet or when the online conversations started out, like on Facebook, early on, people would place, somebody would place a radical political statement, right, or any kind of a statement. And then, sure enough, somebody would come on and have a counter statement that was going to try to convince them of otherwise. And the truth is, we have now, some of us have learned, save yourself. You will not convince a single person to think differently through the conversations of online chat. You will not. All that will happen will be a further entrenchment and the growth of emotion. And emotion will swell up, and it will continue to alienate you. And this happens, until if the conversation, argument, quote, broke out among yourself and one of your long best friends, it could very well be the emotion will grow to the point where that relationship will end right there. And that you can no longer abide that person. No one's convinced of anything. And I can tell you this firsthand because it took me a while to learn that. It did. I'd see people post stuff that I thought was absolutely ridiculous. and I would say so. I think that's ridiculous. And then they would come back with, well, I guess that tells me what kind of person you are. You know, and that's just the way it would go. It was just an unwinding. But, you know, if the conversation ever were to, like your statement from Nabisco or this thing from seminary, which says, look, I get it. I see why your position, I can see why it's so important to you.
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
And as I said, I wish I was more capable of doing it. But I can't get beyond my own emotions. I'm an arguer. I grew up in a family that dinner time was about arguing. And I'm telling you, when we sat at the table and an argument broke out, oh my gosh. It was argument. And then even worse was if my brothers and I and my sister, if we had a volleyball court in our backyard we'd made in the woods. And it was rude, but man, did we use it. But we'd start to play volleyball, and an argument would break out about whether the ball had gone outside the line or inside the line. That's the end of the game. It was the end of the game. Because, boy, we were all experts, and we bring out, oh, that's not how the rules are. But I can't remember a single one of those arguments where the other person on the other side said, oh, I see you're right. Oh, I see that you are correct.
I understand you.
Yeah, right.
Or hear you.
Right, you, right.
So then,
Besides, it's family. That's always a more difficult population, right?
so I think you'll see then, if we start reading now in our text for tonight, wow, is it already really 20 minutes after 8?
You like to talk tonight.
Yes, I do.
Melinda is still muted. Did you want to be muted, Melinda? There she goes.
I was just listening.
Well,
Oh, by the way, Melinda, welcome back.
Yes.
I know you've been traveling too. I've seen pictures of places and things, and
We've only traveled mid-July. We went out to Vegas for a little bit, but I was on sabbatical for a little bit because unfortunately the last part of May, Mom grew her wings, and I'm still trying to gain my footing.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness.
This is my first touch back into reality tonight.
Well,
Let's see how this goes, because as you've always said, I got angry at God
yeah,
because I didn't see it coming.
yeah.
So I'm trying to get back.
Well,
we're glad you're here.
yeah, I'm very glad that you're here, and yeah, wow. So you're not gonna like the psalm tonight at all.
It's okay. Apparently, I'm supposed to be here.
Okay, good.
We're glad you're
Well,
here.
I feel like
This is the day I chose to come back, so apparently this is the message he has for me tonight.
okay.
Amen.
All right. Well, let's keep that confidence and let us know when it hurts the most. Okay? Because not every message that comes is one that sounds like or feels like sugar and honey into a womb.
I know.
Wow. So I'm just going to say before we start to read that, as a kind of I guess it's a confession. We've been reading Isaiah, and then we come to these Psalms. There's some Psalms I just love. They are so endearing and just draw me into the idea of God and of God's love. And then there are some chapters of Isaiah that just feel like transactional hatred. God is seen as doing this to people because they're evil and mean, and the extent to which God punishes them is outrageous. And now here in this psalm tonight, I'm going to keep saying over and over again, because I'm trying to hold on to it, that it's attributed to David or Solomon, the king. And you're going to hear that David, in what I think is a very arrogant way, can I say that? Am I allowed to say that? Is
Sure
thanking God for rescuing him in very dangerous situations. And on the other side, he's thanking God and praising God for really destroying the people who David perceived, or the psalmist perceived, as the enemies. So, okay, I get it. I'm glad that he was rescued. I'm glad that he didn't die and all the rest of that. But I just question whether you really want to go there, you know. You really want to go to that point of saying, I survived and they didn't because God heard my prayers and didn't hear theirs. And then what are we supposed to think?
On Sunday, when Psalms are read, they always sound so positive and inspirational, but there's 5 or 6 lines of the Psalm, and then when we read the entire Psalm,
Yes.
there's a bit more to it.
Yeah, there
than
is.
all that positive and inspirational stuff I hear on Sunday.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the saving grace for me is the Psalms, like Isaiah tends to speak for God. And there are lots of books in the Bible that purport to offer what God is saying. The Psalms are what people are saying. It's the words of the experience of people and how they think about God and their life with God. And so I give them a break. You know, because like Melinda says, it's so honest and so pure of you to say, you know, I don't like to admit it, but I'm angry with God. You know, I'm angry with God. And when and where and how do you get to, you don't want to be. Nobody wants to be. You know, it's not like you get there because it somehow feels good. And so you arrive in this place of unanswered prayer and you know, all the feelings of rejection and all the rest of it, and then there you are. Now, you don't even have the relationship, you don't have the relationship with your mother, but you also don't have the relationship with God that you had been counting on.
It's very similar to that person in the car that survived the crash.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not rational.
Broken, my life is over. It's the worst thing that could ever happen. It's like, okay, that's not the real truth, but that's the way I feel right now.
Right. It is, you know, it's funny you said that. It's not the real truth. Like, because there's different kinds of truth. You know, I don't want to sound like a crazy person, but there are different kinds of truth. You know, and there's a truth that is born out of, you know, the psalmist will talk about a truth that is born in our gut, a guttural truth, which is a truth that is beyond our control, something that's true no matter what. And then there's the other truth that even while you are that person who survived that crash and you're wrapped up in the, I don't know, in engagement of a truth that you can't even take in. And then if there's somebody sitting next to you who's trying to bring you back into the rational world, that's great. But do you know who sometimes tries to bring us back into the rational world? We do. We do. We have this way of self-talk. Like we've just really come into an encounter of the full guttural experience of what life has just done to us. And then, you know, it's a good thing we can't hear each other's thoughts. Because if we did, then we would hear us say to ourselves, now, it's not it's not that bad. And then worse, somebody comes along and actually says those words to us, and we want to kill them because what do you know about how I feel? What do you know about what it's like to be in this experience? You don't, so leave me alone. Just leave.
You have just described the past 2 months of my life.
And, and Melinda, go
I
ahead.
try to help. I try to help the bereaved person because that's my position in the church. I help the bereaved person. I was the bereaved person.
Right.
I was walking beside myself through the process. I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, that's me. So, yeah, so familiar. See, I was supposed to be here tonight.
Yes. Yes, I believe that totally. And I'm so happy. I can't say enough about how happy I am that you chose that idea of, you know what, maybe I should be there. Because I always want.
I have to get back. I have to get back.
Yeah, good. Well, let us extend a hand out to you, not up or down, but just out. Pull in, just to pull you in, because I don't think anybody here feels like they're in the up position to reach down and pull you up. And God help us, I hope we're not ever in this situation of being down, trying to pull somebody down, but pulling out, reaching out, and just, coming together, especially in telling the stories of what's happened to us. It's the miracle of truth. So let's read a little bit and see what we have to think about this awesome psalm that was attributed to David. It's long, so just be prepared for that. So we're going to, I guess, Barbara, will you read for us?
Sure.
Can you tell me where we are, please?
Yeah, it's Psalm 18.
18?
Psalm 18.
Oh, 18. Okay, I'm going on mute.
Okay.
Okay, it says, to the leader, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who addressed the words of the song to the Lord on the day when the Lord delivered him from the band of all his enemies, and from the band, is it hand or band? My writing is very small, of Saul. He said, I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God, my rock, in whom I take refuge. My shield and the horn of my salvation and my stronghold. I call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So I shall be saved from my enemies.
Beautiful, by the way. Beautiful. That is worship worthy, right? That's the one. That's the part we read. Yeah, that's the part we read in church.
Right. The cords of death encompassed me. The torrents of perdition assailed me. The cords of Sheol entangled me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. To my God, I cried for help. From his temple, he heard my voice, and my cry to him reached his ears. Then the earth reeled and rocked. The foundations also of the mountains trembled and quaked because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils and devouring fire from his mouth. Glowing coals flamed forth from him. He bowed the heavens and came down. Thick darkness was under his feet. He rode on a cherub and flew. He came swiftly upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering around him. His canopy thick clouds dark with water. Out of the brightness before him, there broke through his clouds hailstones and coals of fire. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the Most High uttered his voice, and he sent out his arrows and scattered them. He flashed forth lightnings and routed them. Then the channels of the sea were seen, and the foundations of the world were laid bare. At your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of your nostrils. He reached down from on high, he took me, he drew me out of mighty waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy and from those who hated me, for they were too mighty for me. They confronted me in the day of my calamity. But the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted me. The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanliness of my hands, he recompensed me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord and have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his ordinances were before me, and his statutes I did not put away from me. I was blameless before him, and I kept myself from guilt. Therefore the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands in his sight. With the loyal you show yourself loyal. With the blameless you show yourself blameless. With the pure you show yourself pure, and with the crooked you show yourself perverse. For you deliver a humble people, but the haughty eyes you bring down. It is you who light my lamp. The Lord my God lights up my darkness. By you I can crush a troop, and by my God I can leap over a wall. This God, his way is perfect. The promise of the Lord proves true. He is a shield for all who take refuge in him. For who is God except the Lord? And who is a rock besides our God? The God who girded me with the strength and made my way safe. He made my feet like the feet of a deer and set me secure on the heights. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have given me the shield of your salvation, and your right hand has supported me. Your help has made me great. You gave me a wild place for my steps under me, and my feet did not slip. I pursued my enemies and overtook them, and did not turn back until they were consumed. I struck them down so that they were not able to rise. They fell under my feet, for you girded me with strength for the battle. You made my assailants sink under me. You made my enemies turn their backs to me, and those who hated me I destroyed. They cried for help, but there was no one to save them. They cried to the Lord, but he did not answer them. I beat them fine, like dust before the wind. I cast them out like the mire of the streets. You delivered me from strife with the peoples. You made me head of the nations. People who I had not known served me. As soon as they heard of me, they obeyed me. Foreigners came cringing to me. Foreigners lost heart and came trembling out of their strongholds. The Lord lives. Blessed be my rock, and exalted be the God of my salvation. the God who gave me vengeance and subdued people under me, who delivered me from my enemies. Indeed, you exalted me above my adversaries. You delivered me from the violent. For this I will extol you, O Lord, among the nations, and sing praises to your name. Great triumphs he gives to his king, and shows steadfast love to his anointed, to David and his descendants forever. Okay. Can I take half of it? And get the other half? Pick and choose?
Yeah, that's how I feel. I mean, the first part, to me, what a beautiful understanding of God and what confidence there is. One of the commentators I was reading earlier today talked, let's see, I saw it and then I forgot where it is, but it's unusual in ancient poetry about God or about the powers of the divine to describe, darn it, I forget where it is. I'll tell you and then maybe you'll remember it. The translation we're reading from isn't as graphic in the Hebrew, but he's going on in this reverie about God, and he says he's aware that God loves him. He's aware that God loves him. And they remark about how it's unusual. I mean, in all of the ancient religions, and by the way, a lot of the words of this are from other religions. Ugaritic text, there's similarities. If you were to look at this whole psalm, there's similarities to Egyptian writings and things that they would have read. It wasn't all original, coined by this author, but borrowed from the images of other religions, especially the part where, the seas opened up and you could see the channels under the sea and the images of the place of death opening up. These are, especially in the Ugaritic religions, they're almost direct quotes from these other religions.
Okay, could you spell that word, Ugaritic?
Ugaritic, I would spell it Uggarite, Ugarite. And the Ugaritic,
Never heard of it.
yeah, and so it's an ancient religion, and these people they existed not as islands unto themselves in these times, but they were surrounded by other religions and the writings and the prayers of other religions. And one of the things it said is, again, it's such a big psalm, I can't go back and find the exact quote, but it wasn't uncommon in the world in which they lived, both for the Hebrews and for other contemporary religions, that when battles began, the combatants would call on the God of their enemy. And they would call on the God of their enemy to help them. And it's really interesting to say, I'm praying to my God, but I'm going to call on the God of the person that is pursuing me and is looking to kill me. I'm going to call on their God to save me. And there's a place, again, I should probably even talk about it because it's so vague, but there is a place in the more ancient text where Moses is leading the people through the wilderness, and they run into this person who Moses wants to curse another group of people. And in order to put the curse on them, they pray to the God of that people. And so it's just interesting, we have this idea that, there's only one God, and, but there was a firm belief in this time that the world had a pantheon of gods. And you'll hear the Hebrew text talk about you are the faithful one. You are, but in this text too, the writer says that this God whom David, if you accept that's who's writing it, this God has a capacity which, now it's an outrageous claim, and I don't know if I could back it up, but no other religions of contemporary time talked about their gods loving them. They talk a lot about obedience, about following God, that what that God wants you to do, and the risk of not doing it was you could make that God angry with you, and so on and so forth. But David is talking about a bond of love. And I'm good with it. That's why Barbara said I'll take half of it. I'm good with it. I love it all the way up until he starts to provide the reasons for why he gets delivered. Do you know what I'm talking about? Thank you, God. You are my rock. You are my salvation. I know a lot of church songs that were written from this text. The Lord is my rock and my deliverer, and I shall not be afraid. Woo! I love it. I've needed those words and those songs at times where I felt like no deliverance was coming. And then I'm reminded that God is the God of deliverance. God is the God who comes to us, who meets us in our need. But the part where I begin to reject entirely is that I can count on God delivering me because I've been a good person.
And the other guy, he's going to really do a job.
Oh, yeah. And when God arrives and empowers me, I'm going to chop him up like, run him over with a lawnmower in my front yard. And I go, no, I think you've lost your way. Yeah. And he talks about, what did he say in the last part about the God of vengeance? God has given me power for vengeance. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, I don't know about that. I mean, as long as you're staying, as long as you don't take any of this, seriously, and if it's all just poetry, and you're talking about, I can avenge my enemies because I can, chop them up. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend the bow of bronze. You give me the shield, and your right hand supports me. You gave me a wide place for my steps under me. My feet did not slip. Oh, that's all good. I pursued my enemies and overtook them, but did not turn back until they were consumed. I struck them down so that they were not able to rise. They fell under my feet. Why? Because you girded me with strength for the battle. You made my assailants sink under me. And they ran. They turned their backs to me, and those who hated me, I destroyed them. I'm not inspired. I'm not. I'm happy for the deliverance. And if we're just talking about God helping you to overcome your mythical enemies, or maybe the enemies of your mind or the enemies of your heart, those thoughts that you have to do battle against, if you're going to be...
That's you. That's not someone else.
No, it isn't someone else.
My mind. It's still within you. It's still part of you.
Yeah, and even then, if it's in me, if this is a battle that's raging in me, and it's my own thoughts. I often say in church, and sometimes I feel like, okay, I've emphasized that enough, but when we get to the part of the prayer of confession, I so much want, with some power, to say to the church and to say to myself what Paul says, that there is therefore now no condemnation, and that even when my own heart condemns me, you, O God, fill me with mercy and grace. Mm-hmm. And a long time ago, I read in a journal I was reading, I'm sure it's not any different today, that if you look at all the mental illness, what we call mental illness that goes on in the world, now I know a lot of it is biochemically based and all the rest of that, but if you could remove from the human experience self-hatred and self-condemnation, 95% of what we call mental illness would be gone. If grace could prevail from our own heart, from our own mind, the voice that we speak, if grace could prevail for us, then life would be unleashed in us. But so if the battle here that the psalmist is talking about is the battle that, like that, look, I would love for something to come along with a sword and chop up my self-condemnation and bury it under the earth. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't that be awesome?
It would.
So if I stay in that realm, I'm good with this. But I don't really think, in the end, I'm not sure that the human perspective here is, you know, I'm in trouble, I'm being pursued, I'm physically being pursued, and I'm crying out to God, and God rescues me. And how do I know God rescues me? Because God gave me the strength to utterly destroy, to kill, and to remove from the earth those that were threatening me.
So you need that proof that the bad guys are going to be hurt. So
Yeah.
that's why that's the proof that God cares about me.
Yeah. And then what? Why do I deserve this? Well, I deserve it because I've been upright. You know, I've been good. I've been good. I've been faithful to you all my life. Who can pray that prayer? Who can pray that? Can anybody in honesty say, God, I'm in trouble, and I really need your help, and I know you'll come and help me because I have always, always been your obedient servant. If I were to pray that prayer, I get a feeling a big thumb would come out of heaven and just pound right down on top of me, you know, and go, what world are you living in? What relationship have you been walking in? Because I've never seen that from you. Never. So it's a unique approach. I guess part of it was there was this idea that the king was beyond reproach. And this is where I think the connection to our early part of the cult. This is now I'm going to try to sew this thread back to this. That they believed and they followed these leaders because they believed they were faultless.
Yeah, that's the word.
And and there's other parts, the psalmist says, who is worthy to stand in the presence of God? No one. No one earns that moniker in life. And that if we stand in the presence of God, if we're able to come into the court of God's praise, we come and we walk through the gate of grace, which accepts us and understands us. And therefore, we're allowed to enter into the presence and the glory of a God who loves us and to re-engage and to live in confidence. Not that God will deliver us every time we're in trouble because we're good people. It's just, I guess you have to be the king to have that happen. And
it's going back to I earned it, so therefore I deserved it.
Yeah.
Rather than the grace that is given to us.
Yeah, honestly, if I went to a party and there was somebody at the party that had this attitude, I'd be on the other side of the room. I don't want to be around people that have that point of view. I don't. I sometimes get my fill of people who perceive themselves as being very wealthy in the world. And it's one thing to be wealthy in the world. It's another thing to believe that you're wealthy because you're better than other people or that you're smarter than everybody else and that, that there's some reason why you have received, the gift of these. I'm like, I want to be somewhere else. I don't want to be around people like that. Because I don't think it's true. And so is that the model that's being lifted up here in the Psalms? I hope not. Maybe it's just reserved specifically and only for people who are the king. But is that helpful? I don't know. And if we have that idea about a person who is a ruler or who is a person in charge, and we buy into that and we encourage that in them. I remember seeing a documentary about how it is that North Korea is able to extend for so long a period of time with such a large group of people, the idea that the leader in North Korea is completely blameless. They are faultless. They are like God on the earth. And it's so of course you're going to follow them, and you express love and devotion to the beloved leader who is there. Because God is on their side.
So God chooses sides.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and
But there would be belief that God would choose sides.
I mean, one commentator on this text says that it's important for us to understand that in the time of David and the time of this psalm, their reflection, the historical reflection of this group of people was, this is a group of people who had been saved, literally saved from Egypt. They had been saved. And there were lots of other people suffering in the whole context of the world, but they weren't saved. But these people, through Moses, they cried out to God for deliverance, and God heard their cry. And then God raised up Moses to go down to Egypt and to say to Pharaoh, you cannot keep this people. You cannot make of them the slaves that you have made of them. And there was a great battle. There was a great and fierce battle. And it seemed almost to involve not just the gods of our conscious world, but the gods of the river. The river turned to blood, and the quail, or the what was it that came? The locusts came. It was a cosmic battle between God and a human being who thought he was God, Pharaoh. And they cried out to God, and God heard their cry, and in great and wonderful and like bigger than Walt Disney ways, God delivered them. But what I don't hear in that story of the Exodus is that God delivered them because they were better than other people. I don't hear them say God came and heard our cry and delivered us because we had been faithful, or because we trusted in God. I don't hear that. What I hear in the Exodus story is that God loved this people, and especially God's love was endeared towards them because they were enslaved, because they were so down and out. And God heard their cry. Not because they were good, but because they were suffering. And then we move on to, at least in our common expression of faith, you can hear us say in church and in prayer that God hears our cries, that God hears us when we are in trouble, and that God comes to us. And why? Because God loves us. And that's all the best to me. That's all the best of this psalm. the rest of it, I'm watching a, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, but in my complex life, I sometimes want to lay down my critical thinking, and I'll read like during the summer, I always read murder mysteries. You know, I just love really good writers, James Patterson, and I just love to read crime dramas. And so a couple of nights ago, I got turned on to this streaming show that I've been watching, and it's a very primitive story.
What is it?
I can't even tell you the name of it. I don't know the name of it. It's
Okay.
but the story is like, this is the storyline. This guy was a Navy SEAL. He had a wife and a daughter, and he was doing his part. He'd gone into battle and had fought for his nation, and through some strange corporate greed project, his wife and daughter were murdered. They were murdered by a conspiracy of some commanders in the Navy, and when they were murdered, he decided, he used all of his military training. He was an excellent Navy SEAL, and he used all of his strength and all of his skills and everything he'd ever learned to seek out and kill the people who killed his wife and daughter. And there is a I'll call it a romancing, and I see it all the time, and I can watch it and I can listen to it and I can go, yeah, but I don't really believe that. But I have to say that when the writers write the story, I get it. I get it. I do. I get it. And this is not creative. This story is everywhere. You know, there's a whole series called The Punisher, you know, and this idea that, you know, what makes life somehow better is that when you are wrongly treated, especially if it's not you, like nobody hurt him, but they hurt his beautiful, innocent wife and they hurt his innocent child. And so his rage is justified. And he heads out into the world to right the wrongs. Sometimes I hear that in these psalms. And I don't think that after everybody is dead, that life is better. I get it. Rage will tell you that if you just had a chance to rage against the right person, somehow you'll feel better. But I don't think you do. Because those voices in you that are enraged and tell the rage will ultimately turn on you. Wow, we didn't stay on light subjects tonight, did we?
A real upper tonight, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's why we turn to the Psalms, right? Because we want to feel better. We should go back and read the 23rd Psalm. Like, you know, the 23rd Psalm helps to avoid all that way of thinking. You know, the Lord sets a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You know, and says, "Here, come on, everybody, let's just sit down and eat."
Right? Sure.
All right, anything else you want to say before we close?
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah.
More food for thought.
I was just going to say, it gives us a lot.
Yeah,
Right.
a lot to think about.
Well, and I also want to say a word to our watching audience. I sometimes forget, you know, the record shows that week to week when we do an installation like this, sometimes there's 10 or 15 people that come online and watch and listen, and then they dialogue with me. They send me comments, and then I have to go, what did we talk about in that one? So To those of you who are watching, especially those of you who are tempted to join in the conversation, please do. Just send those text messages, and it's wonderful to know that you're there, and thank you for coming tonight, all of you. And Melinda, our prayers are with you especially, and for God's speed on this journey, and your awareness of God's presence with you through it. I'll pray for that for you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yep.
It is He who has brought me through.
Amen.
Even through my anger with Him.
Good, good. He can endure it. God can endure our anger. Absolutely. All right, my friends, good night. I'll
Good night.
I'll see you next time.
We'll see
Have
you
a
next
good week.
week.
All right, great.
Take care.
Bye. Sorry for those of you who are at home.